Hello, wonderful. This is Sarah, and I'm here with Robert Saul, and he has been studying parenting for how long, Robert? How many years?
Well, over 40 years, about 45 years.
Yes, over 40 years. And I'm sure he's giggle, giggle. I'm sure he's going to say parenting and children haven't changed at all in 40 years, which of course they have. But one thing that has not changed is the need to create good humans and good citizens and kids who have a life that is about more than just their phone or gaming or even where they're going to go to college, but to bring good into the world. And that is Bob's mission. So, how are you today?
I'm great. I hope you are.
I am well. So, tell people you specialize in conscious parenting. Is that correct?
Yes, but let me give you a little more background because I think it
Sure.
gets us to where we want to get to. I finished my training in pediatrics and then got in medical genetics, so I'm both. And once I got out of my training, I was gung ho to be the best doctor I could be. But I realized after about 10, 15 years that I wasn't as involved in the community as I should be. And I subsequently heard a talk that has really sort of transformed my life in many ways. Somebody was talking about for whatever happens in your community, 12 words. I am the problem. I am the solution. I am the resource. So it's not their drug problem. It's not their teenage pregnancy problem. It's not their homelessness problem. It needs to be my problem. I need to be part of the solution. And to do that, I need to devote my resources to it. So those 12 words really sort of put me on a trajectory that was very unanticipated, but it's been now over almost a 30-year journey on that trajectory. So I got involved in the community, was really very pleased with how I was, maybe smugly so, how I was involved in the community. And then April 20th, 1999, two teenagers walked into a high school in Littleton, Colorado, massacre 13 people and kill themselves. COLUMBINE High School. I was just devastated. How could that happen? I asked myself, could that happen to me in our community? The answer was yes. What have I done to make a difference? In my estimation, not enough. So I sat down at that point and put pencil to paper. We used to do that back then, and wrote out, and I don't know where this came from, but wrote out what I considered to be the 5 steps to community improvement to make a difference, that each of us had to be more involved using those 12 words. Learn to be the best parent you could be, get involved, stay involved. The most intuitive and obvious one, love for others, but very difficult in our divisive society. And the most difficult one, forgiveness. Those 5 steps sort of were a pathway for me going forward. I wrote over the next 12, 13 years, over 160 op-ed articles based on those 5 steps for the local newspaper. Subsequently turned them into a book, my first book, My Children's Children. And they kept driving me on this new journey going forward. I'd like to think one of the take-home messages as I looked at those 5 steps is that we have lost track of raising our children to be good citizens. Citizenship is a necessary part of our democracy. If people don't care about each other, if people don't care for each other, if people don't empathize with each other, our democracy will fail. So we need to raise our children to be good citizens. And so
I love all this. Yes.
And obviously as a pediatrician now, or I mean, just recently retired, but obviously I've learned how to be more attentive to the struggles of being a parent over the years, my personal struggles, but then also all the parents that come to me and say, what should I do, doc? One of the things I've learned was in that first step, learn to be the best parent you could be. I chose those words carefully. Parenting is a learning experience. It is not innate. It is not hardwired, and it is very difficult. I think it's even more difficult, giggle, than it was when my mother raised me. And I think the technology is even making it more difficult in terms of the interfering things that are going on in our society. And so learning to be the best parent you could be, but not everyone has the same abilities. The best parent. Some people, because of their education, their socioeconomic circumstances, their social emotional circumstances, everyone comes to it in a different way, oftentimes at different times in their lives. So learning to be the best parent you could be is really an ongoing journey. And one of the things I've learned in pediatrics is at times I have to sort of gently pull back the curtain and just sort of peer and see what I can do to help folks. It's easy for me sometimes to tell people, this is what you should do. You should do X, Y, and Z. But my job is to more empower them. And over the course of my professional career is to build up a trusting relationship where they will understand, and we can work together to hopefully be the best parent they can be. But I'm a parent. I'm a human. I've made oodles of mistakes. I've made enough mistakes. But I hope I will continue to learn and help with my now grown children and my grandchildren, and then any other children I can advocate for going forward.
Well, I love within the context of helping children and helping society. I read a book recently, All Joy and No Fun, on parenting, and it talked about that used to being a good person meant being involved in your community. And so often now being a good person means being at every ball practice your kids have, and how it's shifted to where it is. I know as a mother, it's very permissible if I say, I have no life. My children are my life. I don't do anything for myself. I am there all the time for my kids. And I'm obviously there for my kids. That's not what I mean. But when I talked to my grandmother, I remember talking to her about that mentality of parenthood. And she goes, "What? That's crazy. You need to be serving your church. You need to be serving your community. You need to be serving these other areas." But that's not a pressure I think parents have at this point, which I think is a bit unfortunate. It feels we have a lot of permission to be selfish in serving our kids, and then not feeling selfish because we're not serving ourselves. Does that?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's interesting. The Bishop Michael Curry, who's the head of the Episcopal Church in the United States, says that the opposite of love is not hate. Mm-hmm. The opposite of love is selfishness. And I think that if we are selfish and don't take care of our society and our fellow citizens, we're in deep trouble. I think, when my parents divorced when I was young, and my mother, I'm sure out of parental guilt, said, "All I want you to do is be happy, Bob. I just want you to grow up and be happy." And fortunately for me, she set the right example that I just did not pursue a selfish happiness, that I was very much engaged in the community. But if we don't couch happiness in the right terms, I think we have sort of let our kids go out into the world without a good understanding. And to me, happiness is actually a secondary effect of being a good citizen. So I think if we raise our children to be good citizens, citizens care for each other, citizens care about each other, citizens empathize for each other, citizens know what other people are going through and can feel that in some tangible way. And we've lost that. And I think that's what's so important going forward.
So I will be honest on camera and say, I think my parents did a better job of that with me than I am currently doing for my kids. I went on mission trips and went overseas and served in populations that I was very aware of people outside my bubble. And my children are younger, but as I move forward into their complete adulthood, that's something what advice would you have for me and other parents about raising kids who eventually turn into good citizens?
Well, let me talk about my other paradigm, because I think that gets me there. The paradigm that I have is conscious parenting, the parental awareness threshold. And the basis for that was when I shifted jobs late in my career. I went to some leadership training called conscious leadership, and they talked about the line. And when you're above the line, you are conscious, you are open, you are receptive, you're ready to learn. When you're below the line, you're closed, you're receptive, and you're always right. The same thing, I think, translates to parenting. When you're above the line, what I call the parental awareness threshold, you're open, you're receptive, you're ready to learn. You're ready to engage with your children in a meaningful way. When you're below the line, you're closed, you're defensive because I said so, I'm the parent. And those kinds of responses are appropriate at different times. But the whole point is being conscious of it, is being conscious of where you are and trying to make a positive change. So, I mean, specifically to answer your question about what can I do to be a better citizen, as a global citizen, and be the example for my children, I think you have to look into your own situation in your own community, wherever you, because that might be as simple. It might not be going on mission trips. It might be being engaged in the library at school. I mean, there's so many different ways to engage and be with your children and to teach them the right messages, that I think to try to provide a specific formula for that, given everyone's unique situation, is different. But the point is to get involved. And I try to talk about that in my first book. But the other point is stay involved. I mean, sometimes it's easy to get involved, but if you're a den mother, say for Cub Scouts, you're not going to be a den mother for 20 years, but you're going to have to stay involved in some way, shape, or form. And that might not even be scouting. It might be something else, but it's important to get involved, stay involved, and provide that example.
So as a pediatrician, I heard your conscious parenting example, and I also thought about teens and sometimes, or kids in general, sometimes they're open and receptive and they're above the line, and sometimes they are going through a hormonal thing or social or just growing up thing where they are, I'm the kid and I'm right, I'm not the parent and I'm right, but I'm the kid. And it's, is there another piece of the conversation in regards to seeing your kids on that spectrum?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think one of the important things of parenting is understanding the developmental stages of your children. What the kind of responses you'd expect out of your 6-month-old, 4-year-old, 8-year-old, 12-year-old, and 16-year-old are very different, and you have to be cognizant of those. You don't necessarily excuse their behavior, but you're cognizant of it, because that sometimes significantly impacts how you respond to things. Plus, you need to understand your own responses. You have to be conscious of what's going on inside you, because you might your children are 7 and 9. You said
9 and 11.
9 and 11. I mean, what your 9-year-old tells you on a Monday morning and tells you again the same thing on Friday morning, your response may be very different. Because of how you woke up, because of the stress of anticipate of the day, because of something your spouse said, or whatever. So we have to sort of be conscious of what's going on with our children and going on with ourselves and how we're looking at that. So when I say conscious parenting, I'm talking about everything on both sides of the equation. And the point is just trying to be conscious in the moment. And then if that didn't work well, be conscious in retrospect. And what do I mean? Something happens, there's a behavior happens that you don't approve of. In the moment, you have a response. It might have been a knee-jerk, no way, Jose, kind of thing, or it might have been, well, let's talk about it. At that moment, either of those might have been appropriate. One of them might not have been. And if you realize in retrospect, then you say later in the day or several days later, that didn't go so well. What can I do to improve that? And that's where you need a trusted partner to sort of help you through that. But the big thing, whenever you're in a situation where your 11-year-old comes home with those horrible grades, and your immediate reaction might be, oh, you're grounded for a month. The more appropriate reaction would be to pause, assess the situation, and choose. maybe it was because they've just been in front of their video console all week. But maybe there was something going on in the family. Maybe there was something going on in the school. Maybe they have some legitimate learning problems. There's a whole host of things that as a parent, it's our responsibility to pause, assess, and then choose a response. Recognizing that a knee-jerk response usually helps nobody, but it's also a human response. So when we have those human responses, recognizing, taking a step back, and trying to change things. I'll give you a personal example. And again, I'm not patting myself on the back here, but my youngest was, when he was about 7 or 8, said something one night that really ticked me off. And I yelled at him, and he just melted. My wife got mad at me for yelling. And then we went into that family meltdown mode where nobody talks for a couple hours and everyone just walks by each other, or grumbling and everything else. And then it was time to put him down to bed. And I laid down with him. I said, son, I'm so sorry. What you did, I thought was very wrong, but my response was completely wrong. And I want to apologize. And we're in this together. And he said, Dad, would you be quiet? I said, why? He said, I hate it when you're nice. So, and again, so at the time, I did not do well in the moment, but in retrospect, I recognized that there was an issue, and it was important for me to come back and apologize. And so in that thread of what can parents and children do, I think a real important part is forgiveness. We need to practice forgiveness, and that there's so many levels of forgiveness. There's personal forgiveness. And if you've ever read, or if you haven't, you should, the book called Tuesdays with Morrie. And in that, all those pearls that he has, but one of the big pearls about forgiveness is forgive yourself first, then forgive others, and do it now. So it's important to forgive yourself for those, what you have done, and then seek for greater understanding, if you will, for your children, to extend forgiveness and to understand when they need to issue an apology. So forgiveness, as we start to teach ourselves how to do better at forgiveness, and I would hazard to say that my ability to forgive and understand forgiveness is much better at my advanced age now than it was when I was 25, 35, 45. So we need to be doing the same thing with our children, trying to, in helping them along the forgiveness journey. And it's difficult. It's never easy. And we can all think back to situations or people in our lives that have just gone through horrible things. And we say, how could they forgive like that? How could they do this? How could they do that? And one of the things I've learned is if you want to move on in your life, you have to keep going.
Yeah, there's that phrase about, if you're bitter, you're drinking your own poison.
Yes.
And because from a medical standpoint, it creates that stress in your own body, right? If you're thinking, oh, they shouldn't have done that to me, or this happened, or it's creating those stress responses in your body, correct?
Right.
Yeah.
So it's, so part of, again, the parental awareness threshold, trying to be a conscious parent is trying to be open, receptive, and ready to learn. So when it's time to engage with your children, everyone puts down their phones. You look at them, you listen to them, you let them know that you're engaged. Not, oh, what'd you say? Well, yeah, we'll talk about that tomorrow. No, you're focused, and you ask the same of your child to be engaged. But again, we're human. The parents are human. The children are human. And we're going to be above and below the line. And so, pause, assess, and choose. And one of the quick examples I put in the book: mom picks up her child from school, drives through the drive-through at McDonald's because the child wants a drink. She hands the drink back. Child's in the car seat. Sound, I don't spill this. And 2 blocks later, Mom, the Coke just spilled. And your quick response would be, and you pull over to try to clean it up. Well, pause, assess, and then choose. And I use the example in the book, actually, that was that fast turn mom took that shifted the book bag that knocked the drink over. So, assess the situation before you know everything and try to choose an appropriate response. If you didn't choose an appropriate response at the time, use it as a learning experience for yourself.
That's a really funny example because that happened very recently in my own life. And I was getting the tires replaced on my car. So I had a rental car. My daughter, going from school to the activities, I had picked her up tacos because I wanted her, she had a long practice. I wanted her to have something very more meaty, than something else, because she was going to be doing a lot of physical activity the rest of the afternoon. And so I said, don't spill the tacos in the rental car, and then I'm about to turn on the interstate. I'm going to go through a big curve. Don't spill the tacos in the rental car. And of course the tacos went everywhere. I probably shouldn't have gotten her tacos. I could have gotten her a protein smoothie or something else that would have had some substance. But I didn't react. I went, well, there we go. I'll just clean out the car before I get it. But it's an example. I wasn't stressed out that day. I was in a good mood that day. I felt stable, that, emotionally rested, not a lot of stressors going on in my life. At other times that situation could have been very frustrating. I literally just said, I'm rounding the curve. Hold your stuff, so it was a good moment that day. But we do recognize that we're human, and sometimes it's frustrating when the when the food spills.
Absolutely. I mean, because sometimes when parents say, well, my child won't do this, my child won't do that. I say, well, you need to look at incremental steps instead of just saying you have to get from you can't get from the first story to the 10th story without going one story at a time. So sometimes you have to look at incremental steps to get you there. For example, sometimes when we see children with attention deficit disorder, sometimes mothers would come in and say, I can't take my child to the grocery store. And I said, well, the answer to that is don't take them to the grocery store. Because every time I take them to the grocery store, all the tomato cans are down on the floor. And that's a simple response for me. But the point of that is, don't put them in a situation where he or she will fail until you help them along the way. And if you need to do it incrementally, make a trip to the convenience store, or make sure you can do something, because you don't want to knowingly put children in situations where past experience would tell them they will fail, and you're just saying, well, darn it, they got to do it. Support the children as you incrementally get there.
No, very good advice. Well, we've talked about a lot of young children conversations. We do have a lot of listeners with teens. What is your greatest advice in raising teens in this this changing world?
I would leave home. No, I would. No, that's not. That was not. I was in jest.
They'll get it. It's okay to be funny here.
It's a difficult time because it's stressful. Teens obviously are going through this period of time where they're trying to individuate, where they're trying to learn what how the guardrails we put up for younger children have sort of gone down, and they're at the bowling alley on their own now, and they can throw a gutter ball. We don't want them to throw gutter balls, so we need to sort of help support them. It's important that you know what your children, that you set appropriate guidelines for your teen, and when those guidelines are exceeded or not adhered to, that appropriate and measured responses. That is not, again, conscious parenting. That pause, assess, choose might change, like you said, because if it's a stressful day and your teenager comes home with that bad report card, might be very different than if you just got out of yoga
Yes.
and they came home. So you need to sort of understand your own response and try to understand the situation for the child. But we never want to, while we want to be as understanding, and understand how we need to change to the situation. There's sometimes we don't need to change. If we are doing correctly as what we perceive to do correctly, that is, we can be firm but gentle. Again, yelling, screaming, hitting are never, in my mind, appropriate responses, because what they tell a child is that whenever you're mad at somebody, it's appropriate to yell, scream, or hit. And remember the word discipline. Discipline, oftentimes people equate it with punishment. I don't like that. Discipline, the root word for discipline is disciple, which means to teach. So if you ever have any situations where there needs to be discipline, let's make it a teaching experience. So if it's the situation where they've been acting inappropriately and you've counseled them appropriately, and they want to do activity X and they need the car to get there, they might not be able to do that this week. But again, you need to know where they are, when they are, what they're doing, and who they're with, and all of those, the who, what, where, when, hows kind of things. And in some ways, I think we can keep better tabs on our kids than we used to be able to because of text messaging. I mean, when I was growing up, my mother never knew where I was. And as both of my sons were coming along, they could, discreetly send a text. It's not like they had to call. They could just send a text and said, I'm here, and I'll be back. I'll be 10 minutes late, versus not showing up until they're an hour late. So it's appropriate to set guidelines, but it's appropriate also to let them, spread their wings as they can. And there's oodles of books on parenting and teenagers, and in my short little book, I have about 5 or 6 different examples about issues that can occur during teenage years. I mean, you want to driving, drinking, drugs, bullying, all those things are issues that need to be constantly reviewed in addition to sex education.
Well, agree. And at our table recently, we had what I feel like is age appropriate for a 9-year-old girl. I said, they have TikTok now. So don't do, if any of your friends are in bathing suits or anything and want to do a TikTok video, like a dance video, and put it online, that's not something we do. And she kind of said, what? Why would anybody do that? And I was like, well, that's a lovely 9-year-old response. We'll see how you feel about it. I didn't say this to her, but I was thinking, yeah, I'm telling you now, before you're 12 or 13, and I get a video of you in a bikini strutting your stuff, dancing with a bunch of group of girls, which I may anyway, obviously. But, it's trying to have those conversations early, where then when they're developmentally more resistant to listening to me, I'm trying to ease my way in to some of those conversations at the age my kids are. So that way I didn't talk about sexting or sending naked pictures to boys. That would have been completely inappropriate for her age. But warming up the conversation of thinking, if I put something online and send it to someone, everyone can see it.
Right.
Those types of conversations.
And remember, much like adults oftentimes take 2 steps forward, 1 step back, teenagers can sometimes take 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. And so again, understanding the developmental stages that teenagers go through, because we now know that, and again, everyone might define maturity a little differently, but we now know the mature brain in terms of the frontal cortex really doesn't occur until the mid-20s. So, again, still, even when they leave the nest and go to college or into the military or wherever they go, they're still vulnerable to all the what's out there. And so it's appropriate for us to be as conscious in our interactions as we can.
I love that. Well, tell people,
instead of just put our hands over our eyes and wish them good luck.
Oh, no. Yeah, no, that's that's disheartening. And I do not think my listeners are in that. They are very conscious and conscientious. Now, I do want to point out something you talked about being firm and gentle. I think a lot of my listeners would have a hard time with follow through. It's easier to, if something happens, get mad and blow up in the moment and then not follow through on whatever type of, I'm not sure how you feel about the word consequences, but whatever plan you have for making better decisions in the future. If someone's talking to strangers on the internet that are making sexual advances that you've never met, I mean, that, and they're 15, like that, you may not need the internet for a while. I don't know how you feel about that. That's how I feel about it. There's some real dangers, like very serious dangers, and wonderful things about the internet, as you and I connect and have never met in real life, so but what's your advice on, if there any of our listeners have just like, oh, I just don't want to go through the follow through process, I don't want to go through with being the bad guy to some extent?
Well, I mean, it's always, if it's right to be the bad cop, you have to be the bad cop.
Mhm.
I mean, you have to do what's right. I mean, not following through teaches them a permissiveness that will not help them going forward.
Mhm.
And that could be just as, in some situations, it totally depends. In some situations, that might be just as bad as the other situation where you come down as the hard nose, no way, ever kind of
Mhm.
person. So it's but it should never be, unless it's for a single parent household. If there are two parents in the household, it should always be a joint involvement. It's not like, oh, if I ask mom, I can do this, but dad will never let me, or vice versa. I mean, the parents have to be on the same team. And you have to be, and if there's other siblings in the house, obviously whatever happens has to be measured and understood by everybody, instead of, well, you let them do it, but you didn't let me do it, kind of thing. So it's important to follow through. Now, there's going to be times when the teenager especially is going to really rebel. And so you just have to try to, again, just continue to be a part of, sometimes giving them their space, and sometimes being kindly in their space, even when they don't want you to be. And that is, it's so different. Each situation is so different. And sometimes a lot of families need help with that, either from a counselor or from their pediatrician, or a school counselor. I mean, their pastor. There's so many different places to seek help, and so it should always be sought, because we're concerned. I mean, the rate of teenage suicide is continues to creep up, and parents might say, well, I had to draw the line, I had to be firm, and then all of a sudden found out they weren't tuned into their child as they should have been, and a disastrous consequence occurs. So we always have to be careful. When people ask me in general, what should you do here or there, and I can only do it in the context of sort of a clinical situation, and really trying to understand the dynamics of what's going on.
Well, I certainly understand that from a coaching perspective. People want to ask a very blanket, short question, and it's like, well, and my usual response is, I have never told someone or given someone advice as in a coaching context that they went and it ruined their life. And I don't want this to be my first, if I need more context, or it's not enough of a question, right? There's so many things left out. Well, Robert, this was lovely. Please tell people where they can find out more about you and your book and your work.
I have a website. It's mychildren'schildren.com. mychildren'schildren.com. I have an ongoing blog of things, some of the issues that we've talked about, and it shows the 4 books I've put out. The first book, a children's book, a more scientific book, and then the conscious parenting using the parental awareness threshold. So, and if they want to reach out, there's a contact page on the website that they could do that. Be glad to interact with them.
We will put all that information in the show notes so that people can find you very easily. And this is my favorite question to ask. So, if you got to broadcast your voice to the entire world for 1 minute, what would you say?
The most important thing for me is a connectiveness and an understanding about our fellow man. That is, we've talked about citizens in our country, but we're really global citizens, and I want us to all connect together and understand our common humanity. And the best way to practice that is that we understand we will all be human, we will all make mistakes, and to learn how to practice and accept forgiveness.
Love it. Robert Saul, thank you so much for helping us today on our journey to becoming toxic person proof.